The divorce papers hit Jordan Nelson's hands while guests were still offering their condolences at his father-in-law's funeral reception. Rebecca stood 3 feet away, her black dress impeccable, her expression cold as winter stone. Daniel's fingers went numb as he stared at the documents, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. Around them, mourners clutched paper plates of finger sandwiches and spoke in hushed tones about what a wonderful man Richard Morrison had been. Nobody noticed the bomb that had just detonated. Jordan looked up at his wife, of 7 years. He'd spent the last 14 months caring for her dying father, Richard, alongside her, holding her when she cried, driving Richard to chemotherapy appointments when Rebecca couldn't get time off work. "Sign these," Rebecca said, extending the envelope toward him. Her voice was flat, almost businesslike. Jordan's hand trembled as he took it. The weight of the papers inside felt impossibly heavy. "What is this?" "Divorce papers." She folded her arms across her chest, waiting. Behind her, through the doorway, Jordan could see Rebecca's mother talking to the estate lawyer, Mr. Henderson. "I'm done, Jordan. I've been done for a while, actually." The ground tilted slightly. Jordan widened his stance to steady himself, his hand hovering at his side. "Rebecca, your father just died. We just buried him. What are you? My father's death has nothing to do with this." She glanced back at the reception, ensuring no one was watching them. "Well, not in the way you think. Look, I need you to sign those tonight. My lawyer says it'll be cleaner if you don't contest it." Jordan stared at the woman he'd married, searching for some trace of the person he'd fallen in love with. For 7 years, he'd believed they were building something real. They'd met at a tech conference in Austin, bonded over terrible conference coffee and a shared love of obscure science fiction novels. She'd seemed genuine then, laughing at his terrible jokes, staying up until 3 in the morning debating whether artificial intelligence could ever truly be conscious. "I don't understand," his voice cracked. "We were fine last week. We were talking about renovating the kitchen. You said—" "I said a lot of things." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "Jordan, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. We want different things. You're a good guy, really, but you're just so— mediocre. I need more than this. Mediocre." The word hit him like a physical blow. Jordan had spent the last 18 months working from home so he could help care for Richard during his cancer treatments. He'd driven Rebecca's father to chemotherapy appointments when Rebecca was too busy with her real estate business. He'd sat with Richard during the worst nights, holding the older man's hand when the pain medication wasn't enough, reading him chapters from his favorite spy novels until Richard finally fell asleep. "Your father didn't think I was mediocre," Jordan said quietly. Something shifted in Rebecca's expression, just a flicker, there and gone. "He told me last month that I was the son he never had. My father said a lot of things when he was sick." Rebecca adjusted her designer sunglasses, pushing them up into her hair. "Look, you took care of him, and that was nice. Really. But that doesn't change where we are now." Behind them, someone laughed too loudly at a story, then quickly lowered their voice, remembering where they were. Jordan's grip on the envelope tightened, crinkling the paper inside. 7 years of marriage, reduced to legal documents served at a funeral reception. He'd known Rebecca could be calculating when it came to business deals. It was one of the things that had initially attracted him, her sharp intelligence and strategic thinking. But this was something else entirely. "When did you decide this?" Jordan asked. "Was it this morning? Last week? Last month? Does it really matter?" Rebecca glanced at her watch, the Cartier her father had given her for her 30th birthday. "I need to get back to the reception. My family's asking where I am." "Your family, not our family." Jordan noticed the shift immediately. For 7 years, the Morrisons had treated him like one of their own. Richard especially had welcomed him with open arms, inviting Jordan to their weekly Sunday dinners, teaching him how to play chess, sharing stories about building his investment firm from nothing. Rebecca's mother, Eleanor, had been cooler but polite, always inquiring about his work at the software company where he'd steadily climbed from junior developer to senior engineer. "Does your mother know?" Jordan gestured toward the reception hall. "Does she know you're serving me divorce papers at your father's funeral?" Something like guilt flashed across Rebecca's face, but she masked it quickly. "This is between us. Sign the papers, Jordan. Let's both move on with our lives." She turned to walk back into the reception, but Jordan caught her arm. She stiffened under his touch but didn't pull away immediately. "Why now?" he asked. "Just tell me that much. Why today? Of all days?" Rebecca looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. For a moment, he thought he saw a crack in her armor, a glimpse of uncertainty. But then she pulled free and straightened her black dress. "Because I don't need you anymore," she said simply. Then she walked back into the room full of mourners, leaving Jordan standing in the doorway with the envelope in his hands and his world falling apart around him. He watched her go, saw her immediately plaster on a sorrowful expression as she accepted a hug from her aunt. The transformation was instant and complete. Grieving daughter, devoted family member, not the woman who'd just coldly ended her marriage at her father's funeral reception. Jordan looked down at the envelope, his hands still shaking. Jordan didn't sign the papers that night. He couldn't bring himself to even open the envelope. Instead, he drove home to the house he and Rebecca had bought 3 years ago, a modest craftsman in a quiet neighborhood that Rebecca had always said was temporary. The silence inside felt suffocating. He dropped the envelope on the kitchen counter and stared at it like it might explode. Sleep didn't come. Jordan lay in their bed, his bed now, apparently replaying every conversation from the past 6 months, searching for clues he'd missed. Had she been planning this the whole time? While he was driving Richard to appointments, sitting in sterile hospital waiting rooms, holding her father's hand through the final days, had Rebecca been meeting with divorce lawyers and calculating her exit strategy? "I don't need you anymore." The words kept echoing through his mind. What did that even mean? They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable. Jordan made decent money at his job, and Rebecca's real estate business had taken off in the last 2 years. They didn't need each other financially. They never had. Unless... Jordan sat up in bed, his heart suddenly pounding. Richard's estate. Rebecca had mentioned once, casually, that her father was worth a few million. She'd said it dismissively, like it didn't matter, like money was just numbers on a page. But Richard had been the founder and CEO of Morrison Capital Management. A few million was probably a massive understatement. Jordan grabbed his phone and searched for Richard's company. The most recent article he found was from 8 months ago, a profile in a financial magazine. Morrison Capital Management oversees approximately $247 million in client assets, the article stated. Richard Morrison's personal net worth is estimated at $8 million. $8 million. Jordan's stomach turned. He thought about Rebecca's coldness at the funeral, her timing, the way she'd glanced at Mr. Henderson talking to her mother. She'd been so certain, so confident, like she was finally getting everything she'd been waiting for. But that didn't make sense. Richard had loved Rebecca, certainly, but he'd also been a shrewd businessman who'd built his wealth through careful planning and strategy. Would he really leave everything to a daughter he'd barely seen during his final months? Rebecca had visited maybe twice during Richard's 18-month battle with cancer, always staying less than an hour, always claiming she had important client meetings or property showings. Jordan, on the other hand, had been there almost daily. He'd taken a remote work arrangement specifically to help care for Richard. They'd played thousands of chess games, discussed philosophy and politics, watched old movies together. Richard had told him stories about building his business, about his own father, who'd emigrated from Ireland with nothing but hope and determination. "You're more of a son to me than I ever expected to have," Richard had said during one of their last conversations, maybe 3 weeks before he died. His voice had been weak, his body ravaged by the cancer, but his eyes had been sharp and clear. "You showed up, Jordan. That matters more than blood." Jordan had thought Richard was just being kind, expressing gratitude for the care. But what if it was more than that? He needed to know. The next morning, Jordan called Mr. Henderson's office. The receptionist told him the will reading was scheduled for Friday, 4 days away, family members only. When Jordan explained that Richard had specifically mentioned wanting him there, she put him on hold. 2 minutes later, she came back. "Mr. Henderson says you're welcome to attend," she said, sounding surprised. "Friday at 10 a.m. He also asked if you could come by the office today around 2. He has something he needs to discuss with you privately." Jordan arrived at Henderson's law office at 1:45, too anxious to be fashionably late. The building was downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place that screamed expensive legal services. He gave his name to the receptionist and sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. "Mr. Nelson?" A man in his 60s emerged from a hallway, extending his hand. "I'm David Henderson. Thank you for coming on short notice." Henderson's office was lined with law books and framed degrees. He gestured for Jordan to sit, then settled behind his desk with a heavy leather folder. "I'm going to be direct with you," Henderson said. "Richard Morrison came to me 6 months ago with some concerns about his will. He wanted to make changes." 6 months ago? Jordan's pulse quickened. "What kind of changes?" "Before I answer that, I need to ask you something." Henderson leaned forward, his expression serious. "Did you ever hear Rebecca talking on the phone about the inheritance? About her plans after Richard's death?" The question hit Jordan like ice water. "No." "Why?" Henderson was quiet for a moment, studying Jordan's face. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. "Richard overheard a conversation," Henderson said carefully. "Rebecca didn't know he was in the next room. She was on the phone with someone, and she was discussing." He paused, choosing his words. "She was discussing plans to divorce you once she received her inheritance. She apparently felt you were holding her back from the lifestyle she deserved." Jordan couldn't breathe. The room seemed to shrink around him. "Richard was devastated," Henderson continued. "He came to me the next day and rewrote his entire will. He also left you a letter. I think you should read it before Friday's reading." Henderson pulled an envelope from the folder and slid it across the desk. Jordan's name was written on it in Richard's distinctive handwriting, shaky from the illness, but unmistakably his. "Whatever's in there," Jordan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rebecca doesn't know about it, does she?" Henderson's expression was carefully neutral. "No one knows except me and now you. Richard wanted it that way. He said the truth needed to come out in front of everyone." Jordan's hands shook as he opened the envelope. The letter inside was 3 pages long, dated 6 months earlier, written in the same shaky handwriting that covered the envelope. He could picture Richard sitting at his desk, weak from chemotherapy, forcing himself to write this out. "Dear Jordan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope Henderson waited until after the funeral to give you this. I didn't want you distracted from saying goodbye properly. I need to tell you about something that happened yesterday. I was resting in the study when Rebecca came over. She didn't know I was there. She thought I was upstairs sleeping. She took a phone call in the living room, and I heard every word." Jordan stopped reading, his throat tightening. He looked up at Henderson, who nodded grimly. "Keep reading," Henderson said quietly. "She was talking to someone I don't know who about her plans for after I die. She said she'd been playing the dutiful daughter long enough." She laughed. "Jordan, she actually laughed when she said that once she got her inheritance, she'd finally be free to dump the mediocre husband and live the life she deserved. She talked about you like you were a burden she'd been carrying, like these 7 years were some kind of prison sentence she'd been serving. She said you were sweet but useless, and that she'd stayed with you because it was easier than being alone, but that once she had money, she wouldn't need to settle anymore." The words blurred on the page. Jordan blinked hard, forcing himself to keep reading. "I wanted to storm in there and confront her. God, I wanted to, but I was too weak, and honestly, I was too heartbroken. That's my daughter, my only child. And in that moment, I didn't recognize her at all. I thought about everything you've done these past 18 months. You didn't have to show up every day. You didn't have to sit with me during the bad nights, or drive me to appointments, or pretend to be interested in an old man's rambling stories. You did it because you're a good person, because you genuinely cared. Rebecca visited me twice in 18 months, Jordan. Twice. And both times she spent more time on her phone than talking to me. So, I've made a decision. I've changed my will. Rebecca will receive $50,000, enough to know I didn't forget her, but not enough to fund the life she's planning. The rest goes to you. All of it. The house, the investments, everything. It's about $8 million total, give or take. Jordan stopped breathing. $8 million. The entire estate. He read the paragraph again, certain he'd misunderstood. "I know this will shock you. It will certainly shock Rebecca. But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't just about punishing her, though I won't pretend that's not part of it. This is about giving the money to someone who will actually honor what it represents. I built that wealth over 40 years, Jordan. 40 years of 12-hour days and careful decisions and sacrifices. I wanted to pass it on to someone who understood the value of showing up, of being present, of caring about something beyond their own comfort. You showed me what real family looks like. Not blood, not obligation, but choice. You chose to be there. Every single day, you chose me. Use the money well. Start that software company you talked about. Travel. Find someone who actually deserves you, because my daughter clearly doesn't. Whatever you do, know that you earned this. Not through manipulation or planning, but by being exactly who you are. I'm sorry I won't be there to see Rebecca's face when she finds out. Part of me wishes I could be, but I trust Henderson to handle it properly. He's going to read this letter aloud at the will reading. I want everyone to know why I made this choice. Rebecca's always been good at playing victim. I don't want her spinning this into some story about her unfair father. Thank you for the chess games. Thank you for the conversations. Thank you for treating a dying old man like he still mattered. You were the son I never had, Jordan. I meant that. With love and gratitude, Richard. Jordan set the letter down on Henderson's desk. His vision was swimming. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to hold himself together. If you've ever felt undervalued by someone who should have appreciated you, hit that subscribe button. Sometimes the people we least expect become our biggest advocates. And if this story resonates with you, leave a comment about a time someone saw your worth when others didn't. Let's get back into the story. He really left me everything? Jordan's voice came out broken. Everything, Henderson confirmed. The house in Westchester, the investment portfolio, his savings accounts, even his vintage car collection. The only thing Rebecca receives is the $50,000 and whatever personal items she can prove belonged to her mother. She has no idea. None whatsoever. She's been calling my office every day since the funeral, asking about the reading. She sounds quite confident. Henderson's expression was grim. She even asked if she could get an advance on her inheritance to cover some property investments she wants to make. Jordan thought about Rebecca at the funeral reception. Her cold certainty, the way she'd dismissed him as mediocre. She'd been so sure of herself, so convinced she was about to inherit millions and finally escape the life she'd been trapped in. Friday's reading, Jordan said slowly. Who's going to be there? Rebecca requested that her entire extended family attend. She specifically asked for her mother, her 2 aunts, her uncle, and several cousins to be present. Henderson's mouth twitched slightly. She said she wanted to share this moment with the people who mattered most. She wants witnesses, Jordan realized. She wants everyone to see her inherit millions. It's about status. That would be my assessment. Henderson picked up the letter carefully, returning it to the folder. Richard wanted it this way. He wanted the truth to come out in front of everyone who'd watched Rebecca play the grieving daughter. He was very specific about that. The next 3 days crawled by like years. Jordan went through the motions at work, staring at code on his screen without really seeing it. His colleagues asked if he was okay. They knew about Richard's death, about the funeral. They didn't know his wife had served him divorce papers over his father-in-law's fresh grave. They definitely didn't know what was coming Friday morning. Rebecca texted him twice. Both messages were brief, businesslike. The first asked if he'd signed the papers yet. The second reminded him that her lawyer needed them by the end of the week. Jordan didn't respond to either one. Let her think he was just being difficult, dragging his feet out of hurt feelings. Let her believe she had all the power. Thursday night, Jordan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Richard's letter, about the phrase, mediocre husband, that Rebecca had apparently used when she thought no one was listening. For 7 years, he'd believed their marriage was real. Not perfect, no marriage was, but real. Built on genuine affection and shared goals and mutual respect. How much of it had been a performance? When had she decided he wasn't enough? Had there ever been a moment when she'd actually loved him, or had he been a placeholder from the start? Someone safe and stable while she built her business and waited for her real life to begin? His phone buzzed at 11 p.m. Another text from Rebecca. My lawyer says if you don't return the signed papers by tomorrow, we'll have to do this the hard way. Don't be childish about this, Jordan. He stared at the message for a long moment, then set his phone face down on the nightstand. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Rebecca would discover exactly how badly she'd miscalculated. Jordan arrived at Henderson's office at 9:45 Friday morning. The receptionist recognized him and smiled sympathetically. She probably assumed he was there as the grieving son-in-law, supporting his wife through the difficult process of settling her father's estate. She had no idea what was about to happen. The conference room was already filling up when Jordan entered. Rebecca sat at the head of the table, dressed in an expensive black suit that she'd probably bought specifically for this occasion. Her mother Eleanor sat to her right, tissue in hand. Two aunts Jordan vaguely recognized flanked Eleanor. Rebecca's uncle Thomas and three cousins occupied the other side of the table. Rebecca's eyes widened when she saw Jordan. "What are you doing here, Mr. Nelson was specifically requested to attend by Richard," Henderson said smoothly, entering behind Jordan. He mentioned Jordan by name in his will. Something flickered across Rebecca's face, surprise, maybe, or concern, but she recovered quickly, arranging her features into an expression of benevolent understanding. Of course, Dad always liked Jordan. She said it the way someone might say their father had liked a favorite restaurant or a particular brand of scotch. Casual, meaningless. Jordan took a seat at the far end of the table, as far from Rebecca as possible. She kept glancing at him, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the polished wood. She was probably wondering if Richard had left him something small, maybe $5,000 or $10,000, a token gesture that she'd have to pretend to be happy about. Henderson settled at the head of the table with his leather folder. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time for the family. Richard Morrison was a remarkable man, and his loss is deeply felt." Murmured agreements around the table. Rebecca dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though Jordan noticed they were completely dry. "Richard came to me 6 months ago to revise his will," Henderson continued. "He was very specific about his wishes and very clear about his reasoning. Before I read the actual distribution of assets, he left instructions for me to read a letter aloud to everyone present." Rebecca sat up straighter. Around the table, family members exchanged glances. Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand supportively. Henderson pulled out the letter. Jordan's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. Everything was about to detonate. "This letter is addressed to Jordan Nelson," Henderson said, and every head in the room turned toward Jordan. Rebecca's expression shifted from confusion to something harder to read. But Richard wanted everyone to hear it. Henderson began reading. His voice was steady and professional, but the words hit like grenades. As he described Richard overhearing Rebecca's phone conversation, Eleanor gasped. When he read the phrase, "mediocre husband," one of the aunts whispered, "Oh my God." By the time Henderson reached the part about Rebecca visiting only twice in 18 months, the room had gone completely silent except for his voice. Jordan watched Rebecca's face. She'd gone pale, her mouth slightly open. She looked like she was watching a car accident in slow motion, unable to look away, unable to stop what was coming. When Henderson read the amount, Richard was leaving Rebecca $50,000, her mother made a strangled sound. But Henderson wasn't finished. He kept reading, his voice never wavering, explaining that the remainder of the estate, approximately $8 million, was bequeathed entirely to Jordan Nelson. "What?" Rebecca's voice came out as a whisper, then louder. "What?" Henderson set the letter down. Richard left his entire estate, with the exception of $50,000, to Jordan Nelson. The house in Westchester, all investment accounts, savings and property, everything goes to Jordan. The room erupted. Eleanor was crying, but whether from shock or grief or anger, Jordan couldn't tell. Uncle Thomas was demanding to see the will, insisting this couldn't be legal. The cousins sat frozen, staring at Jordan like he'd just performed a magic trick they couldn't figure out. But Jordan only watched Rebecca. She was staring at Henderson like he was speaking a foreign language, her brain refusing to process what she'd just heard. All the confidence from the funeral reception had evaporated. She looked lost, unmoored, like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "This is insane." Rebecca's voice cut through the chaos. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "My father was sick. He wasn't in his right mind. Jordan obviously manipulated him." "Your father was completely lucid when he changed his will," Henderson interrupted, his tone sharp. "I had 2 independent physicians evaluate him to ensure there could be no questions about his mental capacity. He knew exactly what he was doing. He manipulated him." Rebecca pointed at Jordan, her voice rising. "He was there every day, whispering, God knows what, turning my father against me." "You were there twice, Rebecca." Eleanor's voice was barely audible, but everyone heard it. She was staring at her daughter like she'd never seen her before. "Twice in 18 months. I begged you to visit more. You said you were too busy. I was building my business." I was. Rebecca's face was flushed now, her careful composure crumbling. Jordan didn't have anything else to do. He works from home. It was easy for him. Easy? Jordan finally spoke. The room went quiet. Watching someone you care about die slowly is easy? Rebecca turned to him, her eyes blazing. Don't you dare act like you're some kind of saint. You wanted this. You planned this. I didn't know anything about the will until 3 days ago. Jordan's voice was steady, though his hands were shaking under the table. Your father never mentioned it. Not once. I was there because I cared about him, Rebecca, because he was my family. He was my father. Rebecca slammed her hand on the table. My family, not yours. Then where were you? The question came from Aunt Margaret, Rebecca's father's sister. She was elderly, her face lined with grief, but her gaze was steel. Where were you when Richard was sick, when he needed someone? I had a business to run. We all have responsibilities, Margaret said coldly. That didn't stop Jordan from showing up. Uncle Thomas cleared his throat. Look, regardless of anyone's feelings, this will can be contested. Undue influence, diminished capacity. Try it, Henderson said flatly. Richard anticipated that possibility. That's why he had the psychiatric evaluations. That's why he documented everything. That's why he wrote the letter explaining his reasoning. He wanted this to be ironclad. He paused. He also included a provision that if anyone contests the will, their inheritance is reduced to $1. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed. Her $50,000 was already an insult compared to $8 million. But $1? That would be complete humiliation. You can't do this, Rebecca said, but her voice had lost its conviction. She was looking at Jordan now with something like desperation. Jordan, we've been married for 7 years. You can't just take everything. You served me divorce papers at his funeral. Jordan stood, facing her across the table. You called me mediocre. You told me you didn't need me anymore. Remember? The room went silent again. Eleanor was staring at her daughter with horror. Rebecca, Eleanor whispered. You didn't. Rebecca's face was the color of ash. Around the table, family members were putting the pieces together. The timeline, the phone call Richard had overheard. The divorce papers served the day of the funeral, when Rebecca thought she was about to inherit millions. It's not like that, Rebecca said weakly. You don't understand. I understand, perfectly. Jordan's voice was quiet, but clear. You were waiting for your father to die so you could cash out and leave me. You probably had it all planned, the divorce, the new life, everything. You just never imagined he might have overheard you discussing it. Aunt Margaret made a disgusted sound. Uncle Thomas was shaking his head slowly. Even the cousins, who barely knew Jordan, were looking at Rebecca like she was a stranger. Mom, Rebecca turned to Eleanor, reaching for her hand. Mom, please, you know I loved Dad. I was upset when I said those things. I didn't mean. Eleanor pulled her hand away. Did you serve Jordan divorce papers at Richard's funeral? The question hung in the air. Rebecca's silence was answer enough. Get out, Eleanor said softly. Mom, get out. Eleanor's voice was stronger now, tears streaming down her face. I don't know who you are. I don't know what happened to my daughter, but right now, I can't look at you. Rebecca looked around the table, searching for support, for understanding, for anyone who might defend her. She found only cold stares and averted eyes. Her perfect plan had collapsed. The inheritance was gone. Her husband knew the truth. Her family knew the truth. Everything she'd been waiting for had evaporated in 15 minutes. This isn't over, Rebecca said, grabbing her purse. I'll fight this. You'll lose, Henderson said simply. Richard made sure of that. Rebecca stood there for another moment, trembling with rage or shock or grief. Jordan couldn't tell which. Then she turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the floor, the sound fading down the hallway. Nobody spoke for a long moment after she left. Finally, Eleanor looked at Jordan. Her face was ravaged with grief and shame. I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was capable of that. Neither did I, Jordan said honestly. What will you do? Aunt Margaret asked. With the inheritance? Jordan thought about Richard's letter. Use the money well. Find someone who actually deserves you. I'm going to start a foundation, Jordan said. In Richard's name. Something that helps people who are going through what he went through. Patients who don't have family support. Caregivers who need resources. He paused. That's what he would have wanted. Eleanor nodded slowly, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. That sounds like something my Richard would love. The foundation took 8 months to establish. Jordan named it the Richard Morrison Care Initiative, focusing on connecting cancer patients with volunteer companions and providing financial assistance for caregivers who had to reduce their work hours. He donated $2 million as seed funding and set up a sustainable endowment structure that would keep it running indefinitely. Eleanor became the foundation's first board member. Working together to build something meaningful from Richard's legacy helped heal the rift between them. She'd been devastated by Rebecca's behavior, carrying guilt for not seeing who her daughter had become. Jordan assured her repeatedly that it wasn't her fault. Some people just hid their true nature well. Rebecca fought the will, of course. She hired 3 different lawyers over 6 months, each one eventually telling her the same thing. Richard's will was unbreakable. The psychiatric evaluations were thorough. The documentation was extensive. The letter explained everything clearly. She had no case. The final lawyer told her bluntly that continuing to fight would cost more in legal fees than her $50,000 inheritance. Rebecca dropped the contest. Jordan heard through Eleanor that she'd moved to California, claiming she needed a fresh start. Her real estate business in New York had collapsed. Clients didn't want to work with someone whose greed and cruelty had become local gossip. Jordan signed the divorce papers 10 months after that funeral reception. By then, it felt like a formality. The marriage had ended the moment Rebecca handed him that envelope. He kept the house, their modest craftsman, that Rebecca had always called temporary. It felt more like home without her in it. 15 months after Richard's death, Jordan met Sarah at a foundation fundraising event. She was a nurse who'd volunteered with the program, spending her off hours visiting isolated patients. She had warm brown eyes and laughed at his terrible jokes and stayed up until 3 in the morning debating whether artificial intelligence could ever truly be conscious. It felt like meeting someone for the first time, like discovering what connection actually meant when it wasn't built on performance and calculation. They took it slow. Jordan had trust to rebuild, walls to dismantle. But Sarah was patient. She understood that real love wasn't about what someone could give you. It was about showing up, being present, choosing someone every single day. 2 years after Richard's death, Jordan stood in the foundation's new office space, a bright, welcoming building where patients and caregivers could find resources and support. Photos of Richard lined one wall, showing him at various stages of his life. Young and ambitious, building his business, middle-aged and confident, celebrating successes, elderly and wise, playing chess with Jordan. Eleanor stood beside him, studying the photos. "He would be so proud of you." "I hope so." Jordan's voice was soft. "I just wish he could see it." "He knows." Eleanor squeezed his arm. "Wherever he is, he knows." They stood in comfortable silence. 2 years had given Eleanor time to process her daughter's betrayal. She and Rebecca had spoken twice, brief, painful conversations that went nowhere. Rebecca maintained she'd been misunderstood, that the phone call Richard overheard had been taken out of context, that everyone had turned against her unfairly. She never acknowledged what she'd done wrong. She never apologized. "Have you heard from her recently?" Jordan asked carefully. Eleanor shook her head. "Christmas card. Very generic. She's apparently working at some real estate agency in Los Angeles. She didn't include a return address." Jordan didn't respond. He'd stopped thinking about Rebecca months ago. She'd become someone from another life. A cautionary tale about mistaking performance for partnership, about confusing presence with love. His phone buzzed. Sarah texting. "Don't forget we have dinner with your parents at 7. Your mom wants to hear all about the foundation expansion." Jordan smiled. His parents had fallen in love with Sarah immediately. His mother had pulled him aside after their first meeting and whispered, "This one is real." She'd never said that about Rebecca, Jordan realized. She'd been polite and welcoming but never enthusiastic. Maybe she'd sensed something he'd been too close to see. The foundation's phone rang at the front desk. Through the window, Jordan could see Maria, their intake coordinator, answering it. Another patient calling for help, probably. Another family struggling to navigate cancer care while managing work and life and fear. This was what $8 million could do when it went to someone who understood its real value. Not luxury cars or designer clothes or a bigger house, but connection, support, showing up for people who needed someone to choose them. I should go, Jordan said. Dinner plans. Eleanor smiled. Sarah seems wonderful. Richard would have liked her. He would have. Jordan kissed her cheek. I'll see you at next week's board meeting. Wouldn't miss it. Jordan drove home through early evening traffic, thinking about how completely his life had transformed. 2 years ago, he'd been standing in a funeral reception doorway, his marriage ending, his world collapsing. He'd felt mediocre. Then, maybe Rebecca had planted that seed deeper than he'd realized. But Richard had seen something different. Richard had seen someone who showed up, someone who stayed, someone who understood that real wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts but in presence, in care, in the choice to be there when it mattered. The inheritance had changed Jordan's financial situation, certainly, but Richard's real gift had been the letter, the validation, the proof that he wasn't mediocre at all. He was exactly who he'd always tried to be, someone who valued people over profit, connection over convenience, love over calculation. Rebecca had called him mediocre and thrown him away, confident she was trading up to something better. She'd lost everything in the process: her inheritance, her marriage, her family's respect, her reputation, her business. Everything she'd schemed for had turned to ash in her hands. Jordan had gained everything that actually mattered: purpose, genuine love, self-respect, and the knowledge that he'd honored a good man's final wishes. As he pulled into his driveway, Sarah's car already parked out front, Jordan thought about Richard's final words in that letter. You were the son I never had. I hope I made you proud, Jordan whispered. Somewhere, he believed, Richard was smiling.